Hey there, welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show that's dedicated to progressive rock, hard rock, heavy metal, and other forms of rock music. So it's our Monday night look back at a classic rock album, and tonight we're doing this album, Triumph's Rock and Roll Machine. Okay, so the thing about Triumph's Rock and Roll Machine, I think it's a very good album. However, it had a couple strikes against it with me at the beginning. Unfortunately for it, it didn't deserve them, but that's what happened. I started out, as many of you know, I started out listening only to Kiss. And then sometime in late or mid to late 1978, I started branching out into other music. Several of those groups, Styx, Black Sabbath, Queen, and Rush, were bands that I still like quite a bit, but they were amongst the album's first bands that I listened to. In the second wave of bands, it kind of expanded out, and Triumph was probably in that group, along with Van Halen and a few others. But anyways, Triumph, the first album I got by Triumph was Just a Game, and it came at an absolute perfect time. My life was exactly where this album would fit in perfectly, and I listened to it a lot. Eventually, probably in the mid-80s, it became my favorite rock album of all time, and pretty much stayed that way for a good 35 years. 95, 2005, 2015, yeah, so around 2015 it started to fade a bit. 215, 216, 217, and that time period started to fade a bit, and some of the other stuff that I'd been listening to was coming up. And it's since about 2 to 3 years ago, like just prior to the pandemic, it faded out of the first number one spot, the first time in over 35 years, probably, and was replaced by Pieces of Eight by Styx. But up until that point, it had dominated me as far as my favorite, not only my favorite Triumph album, but my favorite album altogether. So anything else Triumph did kind of took a back seat. So the second album I got by Triumph was this album, Rock and Roll Machine. It's a good album, but it's not nearly the same as Just a Game. Just a Game has a lot more of a progressive sound to it, but also has a lot more bluesy to it, and it's more, the production's better, I think, on the album as a whole. This is a more heavier album, with a lot of kind of heavier songs on it and guitar dominated songs, I think. To me, it's more like this is more like a heavy metal album. It's not a heavy metal album, I don't think. It's borderline. It could be, some people might consider it heavy metal. I think of it as a kind of borderline heavy metal hard rock album, in the same kind of fashion that I think of Rainbow Rising. But this album has a lot of similarities with that album as well. It has 2 tracks that are 8 minutes long right at the end on the backside, and then the rest of the stuff's on the other side, which are all smaller songs. So some similarities between the 2 albums. Anyways, get into the vitals about this album. It was released November the 3rd, 1977. So just in that era of music that puts it right in that Rainbow Rising. Right in that Rainbow Rising time period. Studio was Phase 1 studio in Toronto. Length was about 39 minutes, so pretty standard in most regards. Label was Attic RCA TML. Produced by Mike Levine, the bass player, and Doug Hill. Okay, featured on the album as members of Triumph, Rick Emmett on guitar and vocals, Gil Moore on drums and vocals, and Mike Levine on bass guitar and keyboards. Also featured on this album are Laurie Delgrande and Mike Dana, also playing keyboards. And then you have a series of backing vocalists, Bo David, Elaine Overholt, Gord Wozniak, Colinia Phillips, and Rosie Levine, which is probably either Mike's sister or wife or somebody related to him, I'm assuming. But anyways, the album production, I don't think it sounds as good as some of the stuff that came later. It seems a little bit compressed, I guess, might be a word. Maybe the wrong word. Gives me that feeling of some of the older April Wines albums, not as up to snuff, you know. Anyways, some great tracks on here. Takes Time, starts off with Take Time. Love this song. It's catchy as hell. It's got a great beat, a great riff. I think Gilmour's the singer on this album, on this particular song, and does a hell of a job. I like his voice. Rick Emmett has more of the sorry, I don't know why I'm like this. Shouldn't be like this today. I don't know why. I'm not even tired, really, to be honest. Maybe it's some nerves or something. Anyways, Takes Time. Yeah, so it's got that Gilmour. He's more of a bluesy style singer, where Rick Emmett is like that kind of poppy, rocky sound to his voice. But they complement each other well. Bring It On Home. Great track. The number 2 track on here. Rick Emmett singing this. It's that kind of rocky sound to it. A little bit bluesy for Rick, I think. Rocky Mountain Way, of course, the old Joe Walsh song. They do a really heavier, I think, a better version of it than Joe Walsh does. This was the first version I listened to, and I actually didn't even know that it wasn't their song until somebody pointed out. And then I went back and listened to Joe Walsh. Yeah, they're both good versions. I just think this one is a little better. Street Fighter and Street Fighter Reprise, pretty solid songs. Nothing spectacular, I don't think. 24 Hours a Day, yeah, it's okay. And then the last two, Blinding Light Show and Moonchild, really good. Pretty solid. The last song, of course, Rock and Roll Machine. Sorry. Very heavy. Very fast paced for a time period album of that time period. Almost into that new wave of heavy metal from Britain, but they're not British and they weren't part of that movement. This album came out way before that. But it's faster paced. The guitar on here is very good. I can see why he won Guitar Player of the Year. Just like really solid, and kind of a heavy song too, not so poppy as some of their later stuff would be. So excellent album. It gets it's a group 2 album for me. Not quite in the group 1, close but not quite. Not a master album. I think it basically, unfortunately for this album, it took the backlash of coming out after Just a Game, which was a huge album for me. And I know other people may think that this is a much better album than that game. They might be right. You know, it's all a matter of personal taste and opinion. But for me, that's how it worked out. Unfortunately for Rock and Roll Machine, it didn't quite come up to that level. But always a pretty solid album. Easy to buy too, not hard to find. Some of their albums that came out after Just a Game, I think, had better production and stuff on them and some more memorable songs, but they weren't any better than this album. So there you have it. Triumph's Rock and Roll Machine. I hope you like this video. If you did, please like, subscribe. Tell me your experience with Rock and Roll Machine, which is Triumph's actually their second studio album. And let me know what you think of the band as a whole. Canadian rock icons, power trio, you let me know. So from Prog Monster, have a good evening.